And we're on. Welcome to the End of Seeking podcast, episode 34, with myself, Martin, and
me, Imogen.
So let's start with a couple of announcements. Do you have something coming up that you want to?
Yes, I do. So I have twice a year I do a 10-day long retreat online. And so my summer 10-day retreat is coming up in about 2 weeks' time. And that is starting on the 10th of July, running until the 21st of July. So if anyone wants to join that, registration is required. And you can go to beyondimogen.com/retreats for all the details for that. Also, I am part of, in January I was part of a free enlightenment summit. And off the back of that summit has been each month the speakers of that summit have been taking different topics, and my month is coming up, which is the holistic enlightenment month, where I'll be giving a workshop on the 10th of July on energy and energy transmissions. And the event registration opens tomorrow, June 27th. The registration's open June 27th until July 3rd if you wanted to register for that month, and you actually receive all the previous months' speakers. I'll also be doing question and answer. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on around that.
That's
but
where?
Well, the easiest way to access it is through my website on my events page. So beyondimogen.com/events you'll find it. And
this is the Enlightenment Summit. Is that what it's called?
Well, it's called Enlightenment Event, but it was part of the Enlightenment Summit.
So the summit was was a free introductory to these different modalities and whatever.
Yes.
And there was a year-long program
called the Enlightenment Event
with a range of different.
Yeah. So
the whole year long is the event.
Exactly. So each month they take a different topic and have two different speakers, like emotional enlightenment, physical enlightenment, So I'm on this month with the holistic enlightenment. So it's those modalities that don't quite fit into
include everything.
Exactly. Don't fit into one particular category, but traverse through all the categories. So
great.
Looking forward to that. And anything else? Oh, my weekly meetings I'm still doing Wednesdays at 7 p.m. UK time. I do a 30-minute Divine Light transmission on Zoom, and most Sundays satsang at 4 p.m. followed by an hour-long transmission at 5 p.m. on Zoom. All the details on my website.
Great.
Yourself?
Well, at the moment I'm giving satsang once a month, so that's the fourth Saturday. So that's a few weeks off yet. But, I just say to anyone who's interested in what I'm doing, you can go check out my website, martinwebber.com, martynwebber.com. I'm usually writing something, so I'll be posting some, articles or reflections. And, you can also, when you're there, you can sign up for my newsletter, and I'll kind of keep you abreast of what things I do have planned when I do.
Nice.
So okay.
Good. So we were sat down yesterday evening on the beach discussing the podcast that was coming up, and we had a topic in mind to start with, at least. And that is this necessity of showing up.
Showing up, yeah.
That it really is a case of persistence and patience and earnestness with regard to spiritual practice, inquiry, showing up at, I think originally started out talking about writing and showing up at the page for writing, but actually that sort of bled into the recognition of the spiritual pursuit, if you could call it that.
Yeah, your path. What are you showing up for? What are you not showing up for?
Yeah.
It brings to mind Ken Wilber's work. This, I'm not going to get into it, but he talks so much about the necessity of growing up, which is sort of development, psychologically developing, waking up, and cleaning up after that as well, which is a big part of this whole work. We've talked about the need for, on the path, but even when post awakening, that there's going to be cleanup sometimes or often. What we're talking about, shadow work, we're talking still some trauma work, stuff like that. Deconditioning that still happens. That happens before, but also happens after as well. It's just one is sort of more seemingly personal. The other one's a more automatic process even. But showing up is the foundation of it all, really. If you're not actually showing up for the work, for your own path, for those things that are required of you. In a sense, the opposite of showing up is a sort of a resistance, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a kind of a denial. If you're not showing up, if something is announcing itself to be, let's say, necessary, helpful, good, and you're not.
Yeah. There's also, you could say, an element of an attitude towards an entitlement or a sense of I deserve this or I should get that. And that actually in some ways precludes you from seeing what earnestly needs to be attended to.
Yeah.
This sort of passivity or this sense of, there's nothing to do here. There's nothing I need to attend to. And that sort of...
But then give it to me. I want it.
Yeah, exactly. That entitlement, that sense of, I guess the word that comes is I deserve this somehow.
Right.
And actually spiritual awakening has nothing to do with that. In many ways, it's if only it were so simple that
it's beyond such considerations.
Exactly.
Actually deserving and not deserving, because it is sort of grace in a sense.
It's beyond worthy and unworthy as well. Those kind of notions, but there is very much an element of dedication and showing up to that which you are called to, that which calls your attention, and being diligent in that way with what is announcing itself, whether that be practice, whether that be inquiry, whether that be an intuitive calling. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because we talked about showing up, but actually your first, the sentence that you first was showing up at the cushion, I think, was the idea, right? Because we wanted to really, really kind of root this in the idea of spiritual quote practice. And it doesn't necessarily have to be practice as such, but it's like but showing up for your own path, your own development, your own deepening, your own evolution, showing up for that, being present to that. And part of showing up for that is this idea that that the necessity for sacrifice becomes really evident very fast. That if you're not showing up at the cushion, showing up in that sense, showing up for your own self-inquiry, whatever it is, showing up at the cushion, we'll use that as a kind of a metaphor. If you're not showing up at the cushion, why not? What is it then is taking up that time and space that you, given your stated, let's say, goals or your aspiration, if you're not showing up for that, well, what else are you showing? And so what needs to be sacrificed in order to achieve that showing up?
And that requires some radical honesty on each of ours part, to really be willing to be honest with ourselves about what our stated goals are.
Yeah.
Versus what is actually happening, where our attention is going, where our all aspects of life are moving towards versus where we think we want them to move towards.
And the word that comes to mind is congruence. Are you congruent?
Yeah.
Like, I wanted this. Well, let's have a look at how you're living your life then, and those things that you're choosing to commit your time, energy, money, all sorts. Well, what are you committed to? What are you showing up for?
Yeah.
And so is there a congruence between your stated goals? And
what's actually
the
happening,
action, what's actually required to bring that about? And it's not sort of say to do anything here, but just bringing awareness to it.
Yes, to be
Am
clear.
I aligned with what I'm stating is what I'm aspiring to?
And I think that word alignment is critical there, because it's not a judgment of you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that. It's are your actions and your words and your attention aligning, and where they're not aligning, that creates deep suffering, because there's a lot of shame, and then there's a lot of shoulds. All of this comes about when there's a misalignment there, where your actions are doing one thing and your words are doing another, and actually you can't. It's like you feel like you've got one foot in one and one foot in the other, and that creates this sort of tearing apart feeling of confusion.
You're at odds with yourself, in conflict with yourself.
And so, congruence and alignment, those I think are important things to be very much aware of in life. Not just in terms of spiritual practice, but in life generally, actually.
What's interesting here, though, is when we talk about sacrifice as well, like everything in life's a trade-off. There's no perfect solutions. There are only trade-offs. There's only, that's the idea. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And so what we often face is this, as we're growing, as we're developing, as we're evolving, we're called from within to step up to a higher way of being and doing. And that requires then to sacrifice the lower for the higher. But that's okay. But I guess this point that we're making here is like, there's no judgment here. If it's just more about be aware of the dynamics here. So if you don't want to sacrifice the lower for the higher, for that which you were, that which is no longer serving, for that which might and could and ultimately will, if you don't want to make that sacrifice,
we're not ready to, actually.
Exactly. It's not. There's no judgment, but just have your eyes wide open about that and go, okay. So there is, like, I'd rather have, you could say, I would rather watch, Netflix into the night, every day, and not, and just consume myself in that sense with something like that. I just want to live a life of casual entertainment and whatever. But that's fine. Totally. That's fine. But but if there's the calling there, what it's worth noting is that if you're not sacrificing the lower for the higher, you are actually sacrificing the higher for the lower. Yeah. And that's interesting, but that's okay. It's like, if you're not ready for like a step, for an evolved step, that's okay. It's a choice, but do it eyes wide open.
And actually what's interesting is that when there is a ripeness or a readiness for those sacrifices, for that, to heed those callings of the higher, what actually tends to happen is, once that sacrifice happens, once that letting go happens, that release, it is no longer seen as a sacrifice, because actually the thing that you were holding on to, the hot coal that you were holding on to, that was burning your hand, you didn't realize was burning your hand, you release it and you went, the relief of it. Right. Oh, okay. This isn't actually a sacrifice. So it only feels like a sacrifice when there isn't the true sort of letting go that happens, because when the true letting go that does happen, and the ripeness for that is there, it is no longer seen as a sacrifice.
But from the lower, it seems like a sacrifice.
It always feels
like a sacrifice. But once you've drop that you're in the higher, then that
Yeah.
wasn't a sacrifice at all, really, because
Yeah.
this is the.
Yeah.
But it's hard to see, isn't it?
It is.
You talk about as well. You were talking about this idea of risk,
Yeah.
and risk is this idea that you have an idea about. I'm called to this, or this seems to be the way to go. You might be deeply intuiting. I need to step into this or whatever, but there's no guarantees.
No.
I mean, awakening is the great example of this. That you can. So many people who come and do the work, they're like, is it safe? Can I? There's that sense of wanting reassurances that
What am I going to get out of
if
this?
I let go of my control, right, as a person,
am I going to be okay?
am I going to still be able to pay the bills? Am I still going to be able to look after this and do that?
Yeah.
And there's all these requirements for there's an event horizon, so to speak, that you can't see beyond.
Yeah.
So you have to take that ultimate risk, but that risk shows up
It
at
does.
all sorts of levels and stages.
It does, and it's I mean, something that's been coming up a lot for me this week. These two themes of sacrifice and risk, and in my own personal life, and also in within sessions and groups. And it's like, for me, that risk that we can feel it. We can feel the dangerousness of that risk, like, because it is stepping into a completely different realm that we just don't have any certainty around.
Yeah.
And at some point, the risk is not taking that risk. It's like there's almost like a tipping point, like a seesaw, where it feels like just a risk, and I can't. But at a certain point, that seesaw tips, that balance tips, and actually to not take that risk is far riskier. It's like it's like because the reward of taking that risk, the potential that is, you feel that calling of that potential, but to stay stagnant, to stay secure, to stay safe, there's the real risk, actually.
Well, there's this, on the level of species level, humanity, you have the, like, let's say, the cautious types and the risky types, and as a species, we had to evolve the right balance between, if we stay in the cave, we'll be safe from predators, but we'll starve to death. But if we go out, and stay out, then we're completely at risk from predators and whatnot. So it's just finding this sweet spot to be able to, in our nature, to know when we need to take a risk and know when we need to, rest in a more.
I mean, I guess, like, on a personal level, I feel called to take some steps forward in terms of a risk right now, and it doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel comfortable. There's a serious amount of courage that's needed, and we've talked about courage here before on the podcast, I believe. And
Sure.
it's like it's like it's taking that sort of deep breath in of life and forging ahead. Often not knowing the full, like I was talking about, no guarantees, but also not knowing the path forward necessarily.
Yeah.
But sort of taking this intrepid step into what feels like the darkness. And what you realize is you are the light. You are the torch that is lighting the way. You see darkness, but you're the light that sees the darkness. And so it's like, it's not actually dark. It's not actually unknown. It's you are the light that is lighting that way.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of that piece I wrote about the Cave of the Dragons. It was like, you are the light bringer. And so in the face of the unknown, what you bring awareness, you bring the light of your own awareness, you bring your own awake alertness. You don't know what's ahead, but you trust in your own capacity, and you trust in your own awareness, and you stay alert. And it's just this like sort of archetypal image of, the hero with a torch and a sword of discrimination, just moving into the darkness, illuminating as it goes. You are the light bringer, indeed.
Yes.
But that's the showing up as well. That is the showing up. That's the being present. That's not being scattered and at odds with yourself. It's be here now.
Yeah. And that's often goes hand in hand. It's funny, you talked about those 4 things there, the showing up, the waking up, the growing up, and the cleaning up. And they all, in my eyes at least, go hand in hand. You cannot neglect any part
Any
of
aspect
that.
of that, yeah.
And so, you're talking there in terms of showing up, but it's to be congruent often requires us to do some of that cleanup work as well, to be in alignment with the clarity of our heart, the clarity of our mind, is often to have to do the cleanup work of, let's say, deconditioning, or moving past our limits, moving past our beliefs, moving past our ideas of who and what we are. And in that way, we're able to show up more clearly.
And again, that touches on the sacrifice, isn't it? I mean, largely what we call the sacrifice on the spiritual path is our false ideas about who and what we are, and how this world is. Our constructed sense or conditioned sense of what is the nature of it all, and we often fall into comforting beliefs that kind of aren't true, or very much aren't true, but they work, they provide a comfort and whatnot. And so the willingness to sacrifice these falsehoods, comforting as they are.
Yeah, I love the phrase as a really, really sharp knife, let's say, of inquiry, is it true?
Yeah.
And just asking that question sometimes when you're really in amongst some sort of confusion, or in amongst, actually sometimes it's not a confusion, it's a certainty. And asking that question at the opportune moment really cuts through, and actually there's no risk to that question, because you're going to get to the truth no matter what. If you ask that question, is it true? Either it is or it isn't. It's not a judgment.
So what's the measure is your own experience. When people mostly suffer their own thoughts, and those thoughts, as you point out, are they true?
Yeah.
So you actually, big part of the work is often going, is it true? And then looking, well, is it true?
Yeah. It's not a mental thing.
It's almost unconsciously we accept things as true without ever having looked at whether they're true. And then when you actually press into, well, let me look at this. Is this true?
And it's not a mental exercise at all. It is an invitation to take a look at your experience directly in that moment. And so it's not about answering the question per se on the mental level. It's about using that question to take the invitation of taking a look. Is this true?
Yeah, because the implication is you haven't looked before. We haven't looked. So much of this work. I see it a lot. Takes a while to figure out how we're even when someone enters into the work of self-inquiry, or the spiritual, the sort of deconstructing aspect of and the inquiry into the veracity of things that we take for granted, that we take them for granted so much, particularly things like the nature of self, who am I and whatnot. We take it for granted so much that even to ask the question goes, what do you mean? Of course it's. I remember with someone one day I was sort of trying to talk a little bit about the work that I was doing in a casual way, and just pointing to this idea of she was asking, well, what's it all about? Then I said, well, it's in many ways it's inquiring into the nature of person, inquiring into the nature of self, seeing is it true that you're actually a person, or something, a separate person, autonomous, and go and their response was, well, I'm definitely a person. It was like so obvious that they were
Yeah.
definitely a person.
Yeah.
That even to suggest that one would inquire into whether that was true or not was an absurdity.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the barriers to this, is because these things are so deeply taken for granted.
Yeah. Then these are assumptions that have never been
Yes.
thought to be questioned even.
And actually, they're deeply disincentivized to ask. It's built into it. Often there's a hostility. Don't tell me I'm not in control. Don't tell me I'm this, whether to themselves or to others. It's like you can see how the ego wants to protect itself, often by obfuscation as much as hostility.
Yeah. And so a question like, is it true, invites the kicking of the tires.
Yes.
And that's a risk.
Yes.
That's
to even
risk.
get to that point
Yeah.
where they're going to even look, someone is going to even look to see whether something is true or not, particularly
That's
in
a
regard
risk.
to self-identity.
And yet it's very freeing when you are no longer afraid to question anything and everything and put truth as your highest orientation, let's say.
Yeah.
You're not looking for comfort. You're not looking for safety in that manner. You're looking for truth.
Yeah.
And you're looking for freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it true?
Is it true? And it's not a mental thing. I just want to reiterate that. It's not.
Yes.
It's not a mental thing. It's not trying to work out whether it's true in terms of a mental idea or a belief or a concept. It requires slowing down and observing your experience.
Well, I think in this domain, what we're really working with here is the deepest sense of who we are, what we are, what is real, what's the nature of it. It's like that's the deep focus,
Which is totally observable. It's not.
Yes.
It's
yes.
not
Yes.
some piece of information that you currently don't have that you've got to get from someone else.
Well,
Someone else might be able to point to something that's missed in your experience. Yes.
Yeah.
I used the analogy earlier today, and like you're a torch, but you don't necessarily know where the on and off switch is. So you're the light. You just don't realize that there is an on and off switch. So someone can point out to you that there's the on and off switch, and you can use it.
Oh, the light show, yeah.
It's not that you don't have an on or off switch. It's not that you're not the light. It's just that you're not aware of the on and off switch sometimes. Right. So it's not that someone can't point that out to you. But ultimately, it's not someone giving you something you don't already have.
No.
And so it is observable. All of these questions.
It's subjective. It's a subjective inquiry into your own nature.
Exactly. So all of it, now it may be that there's so much veiling over the top, so many conditions and beliefs that it's hard to get to the root of what is being pointed to in questions such as these. However, you persist and show up for it, and the beliefs and the questions sort of, it's almost like a rose that keeps opening, and you keep coming to deeper insights, more clarity, more direct experience of what is being pointed to. And eventually it is very much observable, the nature of your own nature.
Yeah. It's but for most people, they've never done it, and so it can be it's a different kind of process, and even people actually, you come across them who've been like on the spiritual path, on the path of non-dual understanding and whatnot. You can still be you could be years into that and are still actually unknowns to you, still really operating from your mind, and actually trying to fathom it through a certain kind of understanding rather than a certain kind of recognition.
Yeah, there's a lot of intellectual understanding,
and so
but not
sometimes
necessarily.
you see that, don't you? You're working with someone, you can't quite get them out of the it's understandable that the mind's the only domain that they are even aware of as such. As hard to get them past the mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get past the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, the recognition this is not about an intellectual understanding is a good place to start.
Yes.
And in that you go, okay, what is observationally true in my experience? What can I question? What can I look into? Where are my beliefs? Where are my assumptions? Start there. First principle, what's true?
Yeah. Well, this is why Ramana Maharshi was so potent. He cut right to the heart of it. Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What is the nature of this I that I claim to be? And not to seek the answer to that question through mentation or analysis or speculation, but to actually go to the source of your own self, the source of your own sense of being, the I am.
Yeah, which is an observational taste of it rather than an intellectual, conceptual taste of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's recognizing where the source of your own being arises from, which is your own being.
Identify the sense of I am.
Yeah.
Stay there.
As that.
Keep quiet.
So, but that completely uproots the idea that you are the body. So, and when you start saying things, ask the questions, is it true? Well, if saying I am the body, is it true?
Or I am in the body.
Right.
That's another one.
Yeah, right.
Is that true?
Yeah. Go look.
And what is this body that I think I am?
Yeah, people, for the most part, we're caught up in our delusions because we've never had the opportunity or inclination to inquire into the subjective reality of it.
It takes a certain amount of tenaciousness, and as we're speaking, that's what the feeling of it I'm getting is to not just scratch the surface of it, but to actually go all in, to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, of all your beliefs. And that can be very, it can, what's the word? It sort of cracks everything open. Your ground starts to feel less solid. All that you thought you knew, all that your sort of reference points to all of life starts to crumble, and it's almost like there needs to be a rebirth or a reclaiming of what is actually true, rather than building your house on a false bedrock. And so a lot of this is really getting down to bedrock, getting down to truth, getting down to the ground of what is. And from there, the whole of existence is born in truth rather than from falsity or delusion. And so there is a sort of a tenacity that's needed. And I guess that comes right back around to this thing of showing up. Is like, that's what it takes. That tenacity of showing up, that tenacity of feeling the burning of that, of all falsities, of all untruths in your heart, and letting yourself sit in that fire, letting yourself, surrender to that fire and really give yourself to it. I believe is what it ultimately does take.
I agree.
And, you could say, oh, well, how do I have that come about? And there I personally have to go back to the non-doership or the grace of it all. That fire is something that's lit from within. That fire of tenacity and of showing up is something that comes about. It's the grace of it is you. Every part of your being is sort of calling to that, and you can resist that and you can turn away from that for a long time. But there's that congruence, that sort of coming into alignment with that fire that's calling you to burn everything that you're not within it.
Well, yes, your experience of that when that shows up, can be either or like I do it, burn up everything I'm not. That's the idea. I've theologically speaking, I've heard that idea that the experience of heaven and hell. Did we mention this before? Well, in the Eastern tradition, in the Orthodox tradition, many theologians make the case that the heaven and hell are really just different experiences of the fire of God's grace.
That came up in a satsang a couple of weeks ago for me.
Yeah, so it's like, if you're deeply and in resistance to the presence of the divine, you're going to experience that as a horrible, burning, painful. Whereas if you're just surrendered to it, in alignment with that, completely, given to that, and
finding your yes within that,
then that's experienced as profound bliss. So
you were yesterday mentioning this thing of sort of becoming in alignment with the inevitability of life.
Oh yeah, Jean Klein said this, and I love it. I think it was Jean Klein who said enlightenment is the absolute cooperation with the inevitable. And so, but I thought that was quite interesting because we've often talked about surrender, and submission, and that's very real. But I was sitting contemplating this nature, this idea of, that in a sense, we're pointing to we're talking about pointing to the same thing, the inevitability of what is arising, right? And so I found, a great pointing to that is this idea and sense of surrender, which is to say, get out of the way of it, get out of the way of the inevitable. So, but then there's another way of looking at this as well, similarly, but actually different, but actually pointing to...
It leads to the same place.
Yes, which is to say cooperation with the inevitable is itself... it's still this deep recognition of the inevitable, but somehow the will itself is subsumed and aligned and unified with the divine will.
It's say less passive and more active.
Less passive, more active, or less. Yeah. So I thought that was quite an interesting notion, and I've heard it said before. An interesting pointing is to treat each moment that arises as if you were choosing it.
Yeah.
And so that then you are involved. There's some kind of it's not because there's no doing in it, but there's, again, it's that difference between like having a no to the experience that's arising and having a yes to the experience of arising. What, if you're
you're still in the cutting edge of what's arising, but there's a very much a difference of perception around that, as in there's a sense of love of what is arising versus a sense of aversion of what is arising.
But, ultimately the thing is, if we're talking about ultimate views, then ultimately even the arising of a yes or no is part and parcel of that, that great flow. So,
Depends on which level you speak of. If you're speaking in a personal sense of it, then there's a choice to be made. There's a doing, there's a will, so to speak. But ultimately, it all is transcended into the recognition of even that personal view was just what was arising spontaneously, naturally, and part of the process.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all part of it's all what's showing up. So, all that development, all that waking up.
But it's an interesting thing to, I think a lot of, this path, there's no right or wrong answer, no right or wrong way. And a lot of it is getting on board with being playful with the exploration, showing up for that, and being curious and asking these questions of yourself, not getting bogged down in it, but as a way of opening it up further. So if it is, what happens if I spend today saying yes as if I've chosen every moment? What happens? There's a curiosity, there's an exploration. Okay, tomorrow, what happens if I surrender entirely to it? So it's really about being willing to risk everything to the exploration, to the inquiry. And in that, you'll find out what's true. You'll find out what is observably true, what is observably the nature of the way things are. And so it's really, it's not some high conceptual, obscure understanding. It's really, to me, awakening is very intimate and very real and very raw and very observable, and the process of that is something you can play with and really fall in love with the discovery of what is the nature of this, what is going on, who am I in all of this, what is this, what is this world,
and always looking, not trying to construct anything in the mind, not trying to analyze, well, if this is this, then that is that, then that kind
Yes.
of, those ways of intellectualizing the nature of reality. It's always like looking, who am I?
Yeah.
Okay, who am I? Looking into that, I am. To whom do these thoughts arise? To who experiences this? What's the nature of this sense of my own being? Is it rooted in a body, or is a body arising in it? You start to ask questions that are only answered by the seeing. They're not answered by the thinking. You ask the question from the mind, but then it drops into the seeing. See what's true. See what's true. It's experiential.
I think one of the biggest obstacles to this, you could say, is fear and the necessity of safety, because you'd be less likely to ask these kinds of questions if you're looking for a certainty, you're looking for safety, you're looking for a particular guarantee of an answer. And so I think recognizing that often when we go to the intellect, we go to the mind, it's because we're actually, what we're struggling with is the complete free fall of not knowing. Like we want to know, we want to have that guarantee, and the mind often lives in the realm of those sort of guarantees and those certainties.
Yeah.
And so for me, this is why addressing fear and trauma and these kinds of things really supports this kind of work, because when you have addressed your inability to be with fear, your inability to be with difficult experiences, when you've addressed that sufficiently to the point where you can open up to the unknown, open up to your world cracking apart, because what you thought you knew isn't actually the truth of it. So when you have that capability, that muscle sort of worked out a little bit more, these kind of explorations do become a little bit more playful, do become a little bit more available, because you're not just concerned with safety and guarantees and security and these kinds of things.
Yeah, the discomfort around fear. So I mean, fear is a pain in the arse, frankly. It really is. It just stands in the way of, as you say, this curiosity, but also the necessary growth that we're called to. And if one can't handle fear, and I mean that quite technically, if one hasn't got the wherewithal to be able to recognize, make space for, even welcome the embodied experience of fear, and without recoiling from it, being able to breathe through it, being able, okay, that's that, and not completely overshadow your experience and actually drive you into aversion. Actually, is often because so many of those places that we really need to go into for our own growth and fullness and well-being, there's a boundary of fear often, a threshold of fear, or it just shows up. I can't go there.
Well,
but you kind of,
Yeah, you go right back round to the thing that we talked about, the cave with the dragon in. It's that, and yet it's that very cave that has all the jewels and the diamonds and all the elixir of what we're attending to. And so it is that fear is, I mean, we have talked about this, and it's fear, and where being able to do those things, and this is part of the growing up aspect of it, doing those things which are gonna support your body and your mind and your emotions, and that aspect of it, the things that are going to help your nervous system so that you can handle these difficult things, and actually have the courage to walk into that cave, to walk beyond what you think you know, to walk beyond conceptions of who and what you are. That work is necessary.
And make the sacrifices and let go of those things. I mean, because that's. I mean, when you talk about the spiritual inquiry or self-inquiry, quite quickly, actually, if you sincerely engage in the process, it could almost be like in a moment that you'll undermine, let's say, some profoundly foundational idea that's wrong about who you are. And so that can happen really, really quickly.
Within a glimpse,
Within a glimpse, and it'll kind of upend your world.
Yes.
And
however,
so the willingness,
but having that to become stabilized and abiding is another aspect, because then we have all these things that come in that go, oh no, hang on. Well,
that's why I think instinctively and intuitively kind of many people don't even go there, because they know that, like, the moment you're introduced to your own, to certain aspects of your own reality, it really literally can shatter your world, because your whole, this turns the world upside down, inside out. And right side up, arguably.
Right, arguably, absolutely. That's the point.
Because we're not,
here.
It's upside down, but we're already
right
upside down, so it's turning it right side up.
Side up.
We are not in the world is in us.
Yes.
And that when that's grokked as a living reality, everything changes.
So all that goes is that which wasn't true.
Talk about risk. Going into this kind of self-inquiry, you are risking everything. You're risking everything you think you know.
And yet what you're left with is everything you truly are. And that's why it's, you
and
talk
it's
about
liberated.
sacrifice, you talk about risk. That's why it's not a sacrifice. It's not a risk, ultimately. It's liberating.
It is. But from the viewpoint of the lower, it seems like I've got to sacrifice or risk sacrificing everything I know, I have, all of that.
Yeah.
And that's why in some ways this whole idea of awakening is profoundly challenging, because when you put it like that, yes, we're talking about completely, turning your world a different way up. Yeah. It just so happens that that's the right way. When we're taking it from what you've presumed to be the right way is actually flipped.
Yeah, and it's not, so therefore it's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. But it's a challenging thing if you're trying to hold on to your world that's upside down.
Exactly.
And it's very challenging with regards to interacting with others as well, because on that relative level, everyone's walking with the world upside down, and then you flip it right side up for yourself, and everyone's like, what are you doing walking on the ceiling? Basically.
There's an episode to talk about. I mean, living with Adyashanti, he talked about this. His metaphor was awakening, enlightenment is like it's like living in a bar where everyone is shit-faced, but you're stone cold sober.
Yeah.
So everyone's going, what's wrong with you, you weirdo? And you can't even. It's challenging. It can be very, very challenging.
It is.
To kind of, I mean, you learn to live with it.
Yeah, you learn to navigate that. You learn to see where it is appropriate that you, because you can play the game of walking upside down for a way in a time. So you learn the nuance of what is appropriate when in
Well,
terms of
you live
interactions.
you live in the two truths, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean that I love. I think that's the great Buddha's insight. It's like that there's this ultimate reality, which is this is what the spiritual path is aiming at discovering about truth about yourself and the nature of what is. At the same time, we're sitting on chairs. Having a conversation between two apparent people and drinking from cups and it's so you hold the second one lightly, but you can't completely dismiss it, otherwise you'd be like, I don't know, there's a great book called it's years ago since I read it now, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It was quite a famous book for what early in my sort of spiritual kind of, it's mostly philosophical, but it's about half about what it is to be the life of motorcycling and the sort of Zen like learnings of that, but the other one was the other part of it as it was being written was this inquiry into the nature, trying to pinpoint my mic, I guess. I think what he was trying to pinpoint the nature of like quality. Can you pinpoint a subject, something seemingly subjective as an objective? It was a strange kind of inquiry, but he was basically kind of digging deep down into the rabbit hole of what's the nature of reality. But in the end of the book, or near the end, he kind of drives himself mad through that inquiry, and he ends up sort of sitting in a room unfed and unwashed and sort of and I don't know where that comes out, but that's that. Well, the reason I say is that's what happened if you take the mind and go live in the absolute. You can't function.
No.
And that's a big fear, actually, of people who come into this inquiry.
It is.
Oh, if I wake up, I won't be able to function. But the reality actually is, no, you've just functioned as you did before.
You did, although there can be a stage or a phase to lesser and more extent whereby there is a needing of an integration of that, and so there is a bit of a withdrawal into the absolute for a time for some people.
Yes. But hunger still arises and you feed yourself and,
it doesn't last.
It doesn't last.
Integrates.
The bills you somehow get paid but that was a sort of an example of someone who kind of goes there in mind alone and that doesn't make any recognition or concession of that other truth, which is the
so it's not embodied.
Truth of conventional life still functions.
And that to me is the exemplar of awakening embodied, is where there is the ability to function on the relative while still being seated in the heart of our true nature.
Yeah. Well, there's this idea that, and we make the distinction about awakening being not giving up control, but giving up your delusionary sense of control.
Or
it's not, you were never in control. So I don't want to give up control. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to give that up because you aren't then first. But you got to give up the delusion of that will dissolve.
Yeah.
But it implies this idea that you are somehow in control as a person, and I have to give that up in sort of non-personal awakening.
Yeah,
no,
there's a me.
The person isn't in control.
There
is no person
but
to
there
be in
is no
control.
me anyway. So you're not giving up the me because there never was a me.
Yeah.
There was a belief that there was a me. That's it. And that's all you're giving up is the belief that there is a me.
But the me still operates even. The illusion of the me. So that's what I mean. That's the two truths. That the functioning of you and I and still arises, but the deep recognition of one's boundless, formless nature is the primary reality.
Who I truly am.
I think that's it. The wholeness is actually the prime point of reference in awakened life. It's the totality. It's the oneness. It's this.
Who I truly am.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Shall we?
I don't know how long we've been going for today.
Nearly an hour.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, feels like it's complete for today.
We had a chat.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us in our living room while we chat.
Yeah. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. That would be much appreciated.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.